Just give a little.
Check.
Yeah, if you can pull it up.
All right, we have Gerald Undone and Larry Sher, ASC, joining us on stage. Gerald, you want to take it away?
This is the first time you've ever done an
I
introduction.
wanted you to hear my voice.
Are we going already?
We're going.
Oh, okay.
This is happening?
This is happening.
Normally he counts
Let's do
me
it
out,
live.
this time
Yeah,
he-
no, let's just get into it.
Yeah, well, now I don't know. Now you messed up my introduction, Lucas.
Sorry.
I'm Gerald Undone, and I'm here with Larry Sher. A couple things I want to ask you about. I got a couple nerdy, film questions. But first, I just found out that you're here as a exhibitor as well, yeah?
That's right. I have my other job, my other business, Shot Deck, and we've been exhibitors here for the last 4 years. We love CineGear, so
It's my first CineGear. That's why I get to
there
be
you
ignorant
go.
about it,
Exactly. No, all good. Yeah, it's like this is our community. This is like these are some of our sort of core customers, and we love to come here and meet them and spread the word about Shot Deck, which is for anybody out there that doesn't know what Shot Deck is. It's a collaborative image library for reference, research, inspiration, basically to help you express your vision for the next thing you're doing. So whether it's from a pitch deck and needing imagery to sort of express that vision through production when you're talking with the rest of your collaborators, director,
Can you
production
make
designer,
boards too?
you can make boards and you're basically just, in our world, we're constantly talking in film language. So whether you're in any meeting, it's like, remember that shot from so-and-so? And it's like in Google Images wasn't doing it, and just a keyword search wasn't doing it. And the best thing about Shot Deck is you're going to find that image, but you're also going to discover images from movies you've never heard of and talented people that made them. And so it's sort of the visual library, visual encyclopedia of film and
So it's
motion
filled
picture.
up with frames from like
Movies,
famous Hollywood productions and
It's
stuff.
basically like 6,000 titles from movies, television shows, music videos, commercials, basically any moving picture. And we sort of catalog the most referential and important images from each one of those things. So for a movie, it might be 500 shots, music video, 60 shots, television show, 200 shots kind of thing. So whatever you want to reference. So you might
of
just
images from each
so you
wow.
might just want to reference like lighters for a prop master and like look at all these interesting lighters or different leather jackets or black eyes in film, or you might be referencing lighting or composition or anything. So every shot is keyworded in 30 different categories and many keywords, and so it's infinitely searchable and discoverable.
That's pretty wild. Is it just a simple subscription service, or
Exactly.
Yep.
Subscription service, priced very reasonably, I should say. You can get on for free, no credit card needed.
I think
and
you're the
try
one
it for a
person that
couple-
isn't allowed to decide if it's reasonably priced, though, right? You might be a little
Well, our
biased.
customers tell us that. But I will say this, even as somebody who's built the business, even like the no credit card for a free trial, it's like I go off of like the things that piss me off, and it's like, so I try to do that across the board
That's
with
cool.
with the company as well.
Now, if you'll indulge me, I think okay. So your filmography is deep. Congrats.
Thanks.
Notably, obviously, I think probably got a lot of traction on Joker recently and sequel and stuff like that. And I do have a question about that, but there's a couple deeper ones for me. Garden State is an interesting film. Like from my perspective, I've been self-indulgently abusing the time of the people I've interviewed with talking about sort of my favorite choice cuts.
Do it. Go deep. Deep cuts.
Garden State is an interesting looking movie. And I was hoping maybe you could just tell me anything you felt like of what that experience was like in terms of visual language and maybe what you were going for. Because I find it stands out for multiple reasons, the story and the music and everything else, but it's not your typical rom-com, like, whatever you would classify it as. And it doesn't look like your typical rom-com.
Yeah, I mean, I was very late in the game getting that job, right? Like, I think I might have been one of the last DPs to meet. Thankfully, I was my key grip, Sean Kroll, who's worked with me for many years. He was working on Scrubs, and he did the first season with Zach Braff, the director. And he sort of recommended me and got me sort of like, oh, you should at least meet him. And I remember there, beginnings of Shot Tech, I brought a little lookbook, and in there were movies like Harold and Maude and these kind of like somewhat restricted but formal, strange sort of tonal comedies.
Yeah.
Are they comedies? Are they dramas? Are they? And if you look at Harold and Maude, you'd see some resonance of what became Garden State. But one of the things that's interesting about the movie is there aren't that many scenes. The scenes are pretty simple. Andrew Largeman, it's really a discovery of him and him singularly. Like there's no scene that exists without him. You're a conduit through every single scene in the movie.
Interesting.
Yeah, in fact, we shot one scene without him, which was like a flashback to the dad discovering that the mom was drowning in the bathroom, and it's cut out of the movie. And so, yeah, there's really nothing in the movie that is without Andrew Largeman, right?
I gotta go back and watch it again.
But so that's part of the distinctive style, maybe, of like it's minimalist. And I remember because with Zach, our process of like prepping it was couple meetings. I would say maybe 2 or 3 meetings, maybe 6 hours in total, in which we did a page turn and just talked very simply about each scene. And from there, I created a shot list and then a little storyboard with like a guy who was put on to be like, he's an art student. He can draw some storyboards. They're not very, like very exquisite. They're like very, functional. But that storyboard, which is like 800 shots, is basically the movie. And generally, I don't use storyboards, but because I created them myself, it was really just execution. And Zach had already sort of communicated where he wanted these very specific moves, and we had it's all his ideas and collaboratively with me. But it's even though I sort of went through it myself, it was strangely a very easy movie to shoot outside of like other little strangeness like scheduling stuff. But like the 22 days that we shot,
it's not 1917.
Yeah,
or
and it
whatever.
doesn't have that much coverage, and it's like so yeah, it's kind of very specific and minimal.
I did find the palette of it though interesting. My era of that, or that year, the movies I was that era was a lot of similar movies, similar like the sort of dual tone. Like I was really vibing with that, and I found that the palette of that movie seemed almost like opposite of what I thought. Like if you watch the trailer and then you watch the movie itself, it almost seems like, is it going to go dark? Is it going to be like there's mystery? Like I found that peculiar too, and I wasn't sure if that was like something that you kind of pitched of like, I see this as like a much moodier kind of thing, and like,
I mean, honestly, it was like this. I've always liked color, so I like playing with color, whether it's in lighting or just scenes being sort of determined by their color as one more emotional component of the scene, right? So that's been present in my work for a long time. I mean, mostly we were going for something that was like enhanced realism. So yeah, we wanted like when they're hanging out in the basement or they're hanging out with their friends in a party, it feels like familiar to my own experience. I grew up in New Jersey.
Yeah.
So did Zach. We grew up not far from each other. So we had this common thing of like, go back to the well of what it was like to be in high school and just feel what that emotionally feels like when we create the scene. And then it was like, okay, but then just whether it's through composition and lighting, just enhance it a little, right? Just take it where it suddenly has a point of view and it's not just purely realism or purely,
You can see that through your work as well, because I was when you said that, I thought of the movie what's it called, War Dogs, which doesn't have a like it's the realism aspect. I think is definitely something that's been dialed up in that one to where maybe to favor comedy at moments, but also it has this kind of like, yeah, maybe hyper is the right descriptor for it, where it almost feels dialed up to where, and I think it changes throughout the film. And the same thing can be seen in Joker as well.
Yeah, I mean, that War Dogs has a lot of color choices too. Like you think about when they wake up in Iraq.
There isn't a normal sky.
That's right.
In that entire
That's right.
movie.
It's like, it's very hot. It's like, it's warm with like a sense of pushing it a little bit, right? And I think partly it's because it's a dramatized version of something's real, but it's still dramatized, right? So we like to start from real, meaning where's the sun, where are the windows, that kind of realism, and not, make it sort of a lot of lighting. So it's usually based on like starting from a place of pure realism and then just, like you say, amping it up a little bit.
Now, are you there when it goes to color? And
Oh my God, color from the top to bottom.
Because both of those movies, the saturation is it stands out to me as slightly. It's especially in Joker, which has there's frames of Joker where you would almost seem like it's like a dull palette, but then aspects of it look like the saturation is actually jacked up. Certain colors hit harder than they would in the rest of that scene. That they stand out, and it creates this sort of, at least for me, unsettling almost, where it's like, why is it dialed up? And I think it's effective, because even with something like War Dogs, like, I mean, really fundamentally, the subject matter of that movie is like, this isn't good. There's not. I don't want to say things about people, but like, I mean, we're not talking about great people here. You know what I mean? So the unsettling aspect kind of works, where it's like, because things go off in that movie all the time that are that quick turns and stuff, right?
Yeah, I think, again, one of the things about just color in general, and War Dogs was shot, Garden State was shot on film. Up until basically War Dogs, all my movies were shot on film, but War Dogs I started transitioning a little more into digital. And the thing about digital is out of the box in its log form, right, which is effectively like mimicking film negative, right? It is inherently, if you just put a straight like 709 onto top of it, it still inherently doesn't have the full three-dimensional color or contrast of film.
Right.
So in order to even get back to where it maybe feels filmic at all, you really have to actually drive a lot more color into it than I think most people are used to.
Yeah.
And so since, like, for instance, with Joker, so much of it was like trying to replicate film, that we had started shooting tests on film and then went to digital late. So all those tests on film, I then went side to side and brought a digital camera with and said, okay, we now have the exact reference of what we're trying to mimic, and then built a lot based on that. And when you look at that, you're actually driving more than you would think in terms of contrast and color. And so that's a lot of where that color comes from, because out of the box film already has a lot of color and more contrast than most people remember.
I agree, and I love that you said that. I myself have recently started releasing technical LUTs for the mirrorless cameras that a lot of my viewers use. And I released one that's like a more standard 709, where I just make the colors a bit more accurate. And that has a look that I think they're used to. But then I called that one low contrast. And then I made one that, and I got such satisfaction. I was in a DIT booth recently, and for their previewing, they had put a curve on the 709, and then they had this curve applied that, brought the clipping point for the highlights much closer down. And I was like, why are you doing this boost in the highlights and whatever? And it's like, just to make it look more like natural, like film or whatever. And I was like, in my head, I was like, I looked at that curve and I was like, I put that exact same curve into this like LUT that I made, because people aren't used to the way that the highlights kind of like how hard they hit, where the blacks are supposed to be, and also just how saturated and punchy color should be. And I would even do it off of like proper scopes in a chart and be like, this is accurate. And then I'd get some people to see it for the first time, like, why are the greens so green or whatever? It's like, because they're green, like you're shooting grass, like it's supposed.
I know, and I think it's you see it in like the history of looks of films. Once we started shooting digitally, you'll see a lot of them are much more desaturated. Like that desaturation didn't exist when we were all shooting film.
Well, it'd be a whole process if you wanted to take it out.
Of course, it would be very specific, like Book of Eli or something where you're like really limiting the color space. But Book of Eli was film, right?
Yeah.
So you're like, again, this comes from like color scientists at Kodak helping to build the LUT. My colorist at Company 3, Jill Bogdanovich, who she was coloring my films when I was doing film. So I was resistant to digital for so long because it just didn't feel cinematic to me. But it now has so many pros that the cons are much less. But one of the cons is like you have to really pay attention to color and contrast if you want to have those inherent values that I still really love about film.
So when you work on a project like Joker that has such a long I guess a thick catalog of source, a history, and everything else, but a completely different story. So obviously, it doesn't have to be narrated by Adam West or whatever for it to be authentic. But what was that mental process like when it comes to the visual language of that movie, considering that there is a rich history of that character in that world done differently by many different people multiple times? Was there a desire to also find something new and different, or was it driven by this? Obviously it's driven by the story, but how do you approach something that's not a unique IP historically,
Yeah.
but that you have to have a unique look,
I think the script alone kept us from even thinking about the other incarnations. Of,
it doesn't feel like a
of
Batman
course,
movie.
the Heath Ledger one's amazing, and Chris Nolan's an amazing filmmaker, and every other version of Joker or even the Batman canon was never really something we thought about. Because when you read the script, it's like, oh, this is the 80s in New York, right? That Gotham, New York. Todd Phillips grew up in New York in the 80s. I grew up in New Jersey, just over the bridge in the 80s. So for us, I really understood what that felt like in my head. So our references were more just movies of the 70s and 80s of that time, right?
French
And so-
Connection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or, anything, or even, Dog Day Afternoon or anything, from that sort of time, even Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, the original,
Sure.
Anything that felt like Network, King of Comedy, those kind of things.
So King of Comedy is such the obvious
Of course.
nod, right?
But that's more probably thematically than it
Thematically,
is
yeah.
like look, right? We looked
Yeah.
at them, I looked at them, but it was more for telling us like, oh, our memory of what Network looks like is like a reference for this movie. No. The themes of Network and the way of like, that might still stick around, but there was never anything that found, oh, this feels like the look of Joker. So, but what it helps you figure out is what it's not. And also your memory of what the 80s and 70s are is probably better if you just lean in that direction than the reality of those movies in the 70s and 80s. But the sort of idea that 70s and 80s movies, particularly 70s, were like these really intimate character studies of somebody, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's Midnight Cowboy or anything like that. And so in like the most simple parts, that's what Joker was, right? It was like just a character study movie. It was like
Maybe
an old-fashioned
Deer
70s
Hunter
movie
kind of thing too.
Yeah, or like I don't even know, like any of those 70s movies, whether it's even like Serpico or it's like you're effectively going, I'm just going to look at this character from the top to bottom in the movie, right? And that's really what our movie was. So that's why we probably went to some of those 70s and 80s movies.
Well, it seemed like
Because
the city-
nowadays there's so much story and plot and all this, and this was like let's just live with this guy and the
Yeah.
struggles he's going with for 2 hours,
the environment certainly felt like a character though. So I think it needed to be painted a certain way.
Exactly.
else-
And that was more my memory of those times, right? Because in the 80s, early Reagan, you think about like, I'm trying to think of that New York like cop movie in the Bronx, right? It was like, I can't think of it right now, but basically I remember that very vividly and what it was like in the Bronx in those times. And since the movie Gotham is basically the Bronx where he lives for a large part, I knew what that felt like. It's dirty. It was shitty. It was like it was at a tough time in New York City's history. So we were trying to replicate that a little bit. But really, like for tone, not so much visual, like lighting, but for tone, a movie like Killing of a Sacred Deer is more influential on, and that's a modern movie, than like Taxi Driver.
Right.
You know what I mean? Even though, of course, people think Taxi Driver is like a massive influence.
I
In
said-
fact, I never
said
even
Deer
saw
Hunter
it.
and I meant Taxi Driver.
Yeah,
For
yeah,
some
of
reason, I
course.
said Deer Hunter. I was
No,
like-
of course. But like, I didn't rewatch Taxi Driver until 3 years after Joker, and I was like, oh, interesting. I had watched it, of course.
Yeah.
But it's not like something we went and watched again. Whereas
It
I
has
did
that same
watch like
idea
Network again.
where it's like he's against the city almost.
yeah,
where-
and he's also spinning into like a bit of
Yeah.
madness throughout the movie. Yeah.
It's funny how I got lost in some Robert De Niro web. He was talking about King of Comedy and then Taxi Driver, and I was like, "What's that other movie that came out?" And it was like Deer Hunter.
Yeah.
It was like, no, that's
But
not
even
it.
Deer Hunter is great because it's of the same time, right? 70s, and it's like,
But that's landscapes in the woods shots or whatever.
but also just, I mean, it's many characters you're sort of following, but it's really it's that idea that character came first in those movies.
Yeah.
You know, that I think made that decade of filmmaking so amazing.
If I can tie up for a quick little notion then regarding the sequel, which I have yet to see.
This is fundamentally the problem with it, like obviously not doing well financially, but is the sad part about it is so many people I meet are just like, I haven't seen it yet.
Well, my excuse, I had a kid.
No,
Now
I
you
get
don't go
it.
to the movies
I get
anymore.
it, but one of the things that's really tricky about movies right now, particularly
sure.
theatrical movies,
Yeah.
is like the barrier to going to a movie is greater than you have to. The overcoming that barrier means you have to have something that's like when they say like to critics matter to like word of, yeah, it matters in so much as it prevents people from engaging. Whereas you need something to be 80, 90, 100% on Rotten Tomatoes to make you go, fuck it, all right, I'll get a babysitter and I'll go.
Yeah.
And like Folie à Deux is a good example of that because in spite of like the built-in, audience from the first Joker, it just more people than not, then people who go, I watched it and I hated it. They're like, I just haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
And I'm like, fuck, give it a chance. Because I'm wildly proud of the movie still and love it. And I think what we were intending to do is exactly what we did. Even if it was a big swing. And like the movie, if you watch the movie's a mirror into its audience. And also, ironically, the audience that rejected it is just like Gaga in the movie. And you'll see no spoilers, but there's a real mirror thing going on in that movie. Even if in the end it actually sort of, resulted in something that was suboptimal, in our expectations, of which you can't control.
I'm interested in it. Honestly, for me, it's a time limitation thing. I haven't seen The Brutalist yet. You know what I mean? Like all these
By the
movies,
way, neither have I.
all these
Don't
things
tell
I'm
anyone.
supposed to. You got to see all these movies, right?
Well, of course, because I have 3 kids, and so it's like,
yeah,
and that's
you get one movie a year.
I
whatever.
know, and I'm a consumer just as much as I am a filmmaker. So it's like, what do you spend your time in? And honestly, sometimes it's like I'm gonna watch shitty realities because it's easy and comforting, like a cheeseburger, versus like eating like something healthy.
You know how many times I've seen Beauty and the Beast this year, though? The animated one, obviously.
By the way, you know what you should see? How old are your kids?
Almost 3.
Oh, they're too young. When they get a little older, I've started doing like canon, sort of marginal kids movies. Never Ending Story, amazing. When they get a little older,
I
it's
haven't
way
seen that
more
movie
than
in, like,
I expected.
30 years.
No, me too. And I was like, oh my God, I love it. And my kids have loved it, along with Princess Bride, Home Alone.
Can't wait for Princess Bride. Yeah,
Mrs. Doubtfire. Like all those, they're at an age where like they love it.
That's going to be a lot of fun. What I will say though is I'm a huge fan of an absurd musical, so I think I might enjoy.
I'm listen, give it a shot because I think you would enjoy it if you and it's also it's a swing in a good direction in the sense of like we didn't just give exactly what the people want, which is exactly what the movie is saying,
right.
But in spite of like that also may be hard for some audiences. Yeah.
This isn't exactly a press junket, but before I let you go, anything you're working on that you can talk about other than Shot Deck?
I did a movie last year called The Bride with Christian Bale and Jesse Buckley. It's like a Bride of Frankenstein movie that Maggie Gyllenhaal directed. It comes out next year. One of my greatest experiences making a movie. Both Christian and Jesse with Maggie directing, amazing. So looking forward to people seeing that. And I just got back from Australia. I did a movie for Netflix called Apex with Charlize Theron and Taron Egerton.
That coming out soon too?
My first Netflix movie, so I don't know. They don't
how that
like tell
works.
a release date. Yeah, I think they wait, and then they can put it out anytime. They don't have to do the same.
There's no theatrical.
Well, yeah, so they're just like, if it's ready, let's go. Yeah.
Well, I'm excited for both of those things. Thank you so much for your time. Larry, Sher, everybody.
My pleasure. Thank
Thank you
you
very much.